Hey, it's Damon, and this is October, which means a very important day is coming. On October 30th, we recognize Adoptee Remembrance Day to raise public awareness about crimes committed against adoptees by adoptive parents. We raise awareness for adoptee suicide, and we raise awareness for adoptees living without citizenship in the United States or who've been deported due to legal mistakes made by adoptive parents, adoptive agencies, and other components of the adoption system. It isn't commonly shared outside of adoption-focused platforms like Who Am I Really and others, but there's a serious reality that adoptive parents can sometimes be abusive. Some adopted people live with mental abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse. Unbelievably, some adoptees lose their lives at the hands of the very people who pledged to the system that they would be the child's protector. Some of us know that a disproportionate number of adopted and foster youth end up incarcerated, but lesser known is the number of them who decide to end it all. It's important to carry forth the memory of adoptees we've lost. Finally, mistakes in legal processing, negative political undercurrents, and other influences are putting adopted people who don't have correctly documented citizenship in the U.S. in danger of legal trouble and deportation. Don't forget, the adopted person didn't ask to come to this country, yet the mistakes of the adults in control end up placing the adopted person's very comfort in calling the U.S. their home in jeopardy. Compounding the problem, some adopted people are deported to their country of origin, but the country where they were born may not be a place they identify with, feel they have roots in, or have a support structure to suddenly start a new life. On October 30th, we wear yellow in solidarity with all of these adoptees we are focused on that day and we advocate for throughout the year. You can take to social media using the hashtag Adoptee Remembrance Day or ARD 2022. Soon, I'll bring you an interview with Pamela Karanova, the founder of Adoptee Remembrance Day and the Adoptees Connect Network. I hope you'll join the movement to remember adopted people struggling through these issues and more.
I think she was kind of a little overwhelmed, and I wanted to elevate things, and she wanted to put the brakes on it because I think she didn't know what box to put me in. There wasn't really a category, and I think that she was also starting to feel a little bit like she was betraying her parents. And so I logically understood that, but I was just beside myself with the rejection part.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I, Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and today's guest is Donna, who called me one early Sunday morning from Scottsdale, Arizona. Donna's condition at birth meant she was going straight to the hospital before her adoption, ensuring her detachment from her birth mother and her future family until she recovered. When she was a teenager, Donna was cut off by her adoptive father when she got pregnant, then placed her own daughter for adoption. In reunion, Donna has found a best friend in her birth mother, a birth father who's too full of himself and unkind to remain in contact with, and her daughter, whom she had to wait years for until the time was right for everyone to connect more deeply. This is Donna's journey. Donna was born in a Salvation Army maternity home in St. Louis, Missouri. Her birth mother had lived there for several months until Donna's arrival. She was born with a condition called gastroschisis, which means she had a hole in her abdomen through which her little organs escaped her body. Back when Donna was born, there was nothing doctors could do in utero to manage her condition, so when she arrived, she was whisked off to the hospital.
I was really, really sick for the first 6 or 7 months of my life. I was in the hospital that whole time. And as my file reads, I was close to death 3 or 4 times. And it is a really tricky surgery, to figure everything out. But I survived and went into an adoption agency with the Children's Home Society of Missouri. I think I was about 7 or 8 months old. So those first several months of life, I didn't, have the opportunity to bond with anybody. And I've learned in therapy that that was a huge factor in me not being able to bond with people as easily as others are. So that was interesting to find that out about myself. But anyway, I bonded at the orphanage with another adoptee whose name is Sheba. And we ended up going to the same grade school together because her parents and my parents recognized each other. We had been adopted within the same week or so. So my parents were there visiting, her adopted parents were visiting and stuff before you go through the actual adoption process. And they remembered each other. So we ended up at the same grade school and ended up living maybe 4 or 5 miles from each other. So when we were teenagers, we kind of drifted apart. She went to a different school. I went to a different school. And we actually ended up finding each other on Facebook when Facebook came out. And so we're still in contact.
Wow.
And it's crazy because we're 50-something years old now, and here we are still friends.
Oh my gosh, two adoptees adopted into different families, kind of went to grade school together, lost touch, and found each other again later. That's really, really cool. Wow.
We definitely feel like we've lived another life together or something. We're some kind of soulmate-ish type thing.
That's really,
for me,
really
for her
interesting.
too, it's just kind of a special relationship.
So can I ask just quickly on
Sure.
your adoption? It sounds like were medically fragile. Did you have the impression when you were younger that that was the reason you were put up for adoption? Placed?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of people were hesitant to even consider adopting me. And so when a doctor and his wife came along, they just went, oh my God, this is meant to be. Because I think they wanted a physician, somebody who was, maybe able to take care of me financially as well as medically and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So when my dad and my mom came along, I think they just went, oh, this is a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
But my dad was undaunted by any medical challenges that I faced. And he was quite fascinated by the gastroschisis. It's not something he had ever seen before in his practice. It was something, you only read about in medical books.
After her adoption, Donna's parents brought home her little brother, who is coincidentally 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days younger than Donna. When she was about 5 years old, their parents started fighting and divorce was on the horizon. When Donna was 7 years old, their father told them that their mother had passed away. He raised the children on his own, but he was a busy guy with a private medical practice and serving as a board member for multiple local hospitals. I asked Donna about her brother, and she told me they had one another when they were growing up, but as they grew older, they've become complete opposites. She's a morning person, and he's a night owl. She's got 1 child. He has 5. He's been married multiple times. Donna's never been married. As kids, their father was an anomaly among parents in the 1970s, a single, divorced father with 2 kids.
My dad and I had a very, I'll say, a tumultuous relationship. We were very much alike, but my dad was a physician and very smart and successful, and he thought that both of us should kind of aspire to do the same. And so that whole nurture thing was really kind of left out of the equation, I will say. My dad supported us when we were in athletics and whatnot. He would come to our meets or events and whatnot, but we weren't really doing what he thought we should be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he didn't really cultivate our interests as much as I would have liked. But again, he was really into us being into sports, so that was something he did cultivate for us. And I'm glad for that. I was in gymnastics and swimming and diving. My brother was into hockey and football and, all that stuff. So, I think we kind of just did the best we could and tried to move on. And, our young life was traumatized by the fact that our mom had passed away. But we did our best. And then when I was 18, I went off to college in Missouri and ended up getting pregnant and had a child. And that changed my whole life completely. Mm-hmm. And my dad and my brother moved out to Arizona when I was 19. And so I didn't see them for a while because I stayed in Missouri. And my dad was a little miffed at me for years about the whole unwed pregnancy thing. Mm-hmm. So as you can imagine, that was certainly, not what he wanted for his daughter. And I really wasn't interested in finding out much about my birth family until I had my daughter. And that's when I think I was 19, and I went to the Children's Home Society and just asked for some non-identifying information or whatever they could give me. And they did. And that kind of, they told me my birth mother was 26 when she had me, and that my birth father was also the same age, and that they had a whirlwind romance, and he proposed, and they were going to get married. And then she got pregnant with me and told him that she was pregnant, and he flipped out, and they didn't see each other after that. So anywho.
Yeah. And did you raise your daughter?
I did not. I planned to give her up for adoption. When I had her and I saw her, I was really scrambling to try and figure out how I could make it work. But with no family support and no support of any kind from really anybody, I mean, there just really wasn't anybody to come in and go, we'll save you, we'll help you, we'll get you started. And my dad was adamant that I not raise this illegitimate child. And I have some thoughts about that. I think everything has kind of worked out for the best with her. So, it is what it is. But I was 19 and very sheltered and naive to begin with. So I think that the best decision I could have made for her was to place her in adoption. And, my father had actually wanted me to have an abortion when he found out. And I just told him, hey, if my birth mother would have aborted me, you wouldn't have me. And I just can't do that. And so that was a huge struggle with my father and I. And he didn't see why I had to go through with the pregnancy and ruin my whole life, et cetera, and tarnish the family name. That was another big thing with him. But I'm not like that. I'm not cut from that cloth. And I didn't care who knew or what anybody thought. I just wanted to do what was best for her, what was best for me. And I didn't have any regrets about it at the time. And to this day, I don't really, for the most part, because I do think everything worked out as it was supposed to be.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. What you think you can accomplish as a parent, as well as the pressure that you're getting from your own parent about not parenting, in its various forms. There's a lot to deal with in there. And I can see how it would have been challenging to try to make any decision, let alone the quote unquote right one. But I like that you told your dad, listen, if it wasn't for adoption, I wouldn't be part of this family. That's a really important sort of holding up the mirror moment.
And I didn't understand how he didn't get that. But I kind of look back and kind of go, all right, I understand now why you didn't get that. Because he was raised in a totally different era. And being a physician and, he could have easily guided me to any place in the St. Louis area to get an abortion.
Donna's adoptive father put her out of the house and stopped supporting her financially. She couch surfed, worked 2 jobs, and went to community college to try to finish her education. Around 27 years old, Donna's brother called from Scottsdale, Arizona, where he had moved with their father. Their dad had smoked most of his life, developed emphysema, and they had moved to the clearer skies and better air of Scottsdale to alleviate the burden on his lungs. Her brother shared that their father was getting worse, and he could really use some help to care for him.
I thought, well, let me come out for a visit and kind of test things, because after I had my daughter, my relationship with my father was very strained for years, and it took him probably a good 6-7 years to, I guess, put it behind him. It was really just a thorn in his side for many years, and it was, the egregious, unforgivable error that I made. But when he was in his final 2 years, I did move out to Arizona and help my brother take care of him as best as we could. And my dad, one night, we were having a cocktail out on the patio, and he looked over at me and he said, I just wanted to let you know that I'm really sorry for the way that I treated you when you were pregnant and all that. And that's all he said. But I couldn't even say anything back. I was trying to fight tears, and I was just so blown away. My dad has never apologized to me for anything, and I don't know about anybody else. But it was a moment that it's a core memory. It was definitely a moment that I went, oh, I'm accepted. I'm not that outcast anymore. So it was a good moment for me. And then he passed away at the end of 1993. And I think it was within a couple of years of that, within a few years, the internet came out and was kind of in its infancy. I worked for a company that had just gotten all brand new computers and we had internet capability. So I asked my boss one night if I could stay late and use the computer and use the internet. And he said, well, sure, but what for? And I said, well, I'm adopted and I want to find my birth family. And he was totally on board. He actually stayed with me one night and helped guide me through some searches and stuff because things were still really changing at that time. I think it was 1997 and, things were still blossoming on the World Wide Web.
Mm-hmm.
And so he guided me and helped me. And I found out, that I could petition the courts in St. Louis to open my adoption records. And I hired a confidential intermediary to do the search. And I forget her name, but she was just the nicest person.
Can I ask, I just want to ask a couple of clarifying questions before you get too far.
Sure.
So one, you said that you got pregnant in college unexpectedly, and it was after your pregnancy that you went to Children's Home Society and asked for your own records. Is that correct?
Yes, it was actually the same month that I gave birth. It was just later that month.
So after you gave birth, you went to your own adoption agency to try to learn more about yourself. That's really interesting.
Yes.
Wow. And what did your records say?
My birth mother was 26. She was one of 5 children. She was Catholic, and that she was part Irish and part German and a little Scottish, that kind of thing. And that my birth father was also the same age, and that she really didn't know much about his family history other than she thought he was maybe Czechoslovakian and German, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that he had 2 brothers and he was a middle child. So I think that's most of what I learned. I do know that the lady that I met with at that time, who was the executive director of the Children's Home Society of Missouri, had been a part of that organization since before my birth. And she remembered my birth mother and said, you look very much like your birth mother. And I said, ooh, is there a picture? And she said, no, but I worked here back then and I remember her.
Wow.
And I remember just thinking, wow, that was so cool. It was such a moment. Like, this is as close as I'm going to get.
Yeah.
This lady sitting across the desk for me, knew her and remembered her. So I was,
and is looking cool at your face and saying, I remember the woman who gave birth to you and you look like her. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. It was a cool moment.
Mm-hmm. So then you've had your child, you've given her up for adoption, and you, it sounds like, are also having curiosities about seeking out your own biological family. You've given a child up for adoption. You've placed a person out into the world to grow up on her own. And how was that for you, the sort of thought process that went, you're working 2 jobs, you're trying to survive, and that you and your body have gone through a pregnancy. How was it for you to be a birth mother?
I think initially I was okay with things, but when I turned 21 and I was able to drink legally, I started drinking a lot. I started going out and partying and kind of hanging out with my friends, and just, I think there was a girl that I met that had also placed a child for adoption. I think we worked together, if I remember correctly. I was 21, and we both kind of were like, oh wow, we're kindred spirits, and we talked about it. And that was the first time in a while that anybody had asked me about it. And, just in general, having a conversation with somebody who went through something that wasn't exactly the same, but in many instances similar. She had a very different background, and there was so many differences, but yet we both gave up a child for adoption. So it was really interesting to talk to somebody else who had that unique experience. Mm-hmm. And anyway, but that I remember just having that validation, I guess, that what I did was, now I wasn't the only person in the world that did this.
Right.
Because I had been kind of feeling for the last few years that I was this huge sinner, this awful person. I disgraced my family, all that pretentious stuff. And I'm just not that way. But my dad obviously grew up in a different era. If he was still alive today, he'd be almost 100. So very different times.
Right.
But anyway, I think in my early to mid 20s, I kind of lost a little control. I was drinking heavily. I was smoking some weed. And really, that was it. I had no desire to really do anything else or delve into anything further because I had a life. I had 2 jobs. I was trying to go to college, and but I think that it was more of a coping mechanism.
Donna moved to Arizona when she was 27 years old, and it changed a lot of things in her life. She was taking care of her dad, so there was no time for drinking and smoking in her role as a caregiver. Not to mention, she was disconnected from her hangout crew in a new city. Donna had put those prior days behind her. She said she and her dad had a few conversations about how he wished he had done a few things differently, and she admitted she wished she had done some things differently too, to make him proud of her instead of embarrassed.
After he passed away, it hit me like that was my only parent that I had for most of my life. There was times where I would be so sad and so lost, and times I was so liberated and free. I didn't have to, I guess, deal with my dad and his mental stuff. So it was both, I don't want to say a joyous occasion when he passed away, but it was very liberating and I definitely felt more adult than I ever felt in my life. And especially after some of the talks that we had, including where he apologized to me, it brought up a lot of interesting emotions.
Yeah.
And I think feeling as lost as I did when I first got into the internet, that was the first thing I wanted to do. It was the only thing I was interested in doing on the internet, was searching for my birth family. So when the intermediary contacted me and said, well, your birth mom is not sure about how she wants to proceed. She read your letter, and I think what got to her is that you said you were also a birth mother. But for now, she just wants to write letters. Are you okay with that? And I said, wow, okay. So it was a temporary rejection, I guess. But at the time, she later explained to me that when she had me, that the thought was to tell all these pregnant women, just forget about it. Just pretend the baby died, forget this ever happened, move on with your life. And I think she really took that to heart. She knew I wasn't deceased, because that was silly, I thought, that they would tell them that. But she just tried her best to move on with her life. And so me knocking on that proverbial door all these years later, I think brought up a lot of things for her that maybe she hadn't dealt with. So we wrote letters back and forth for about 6 months. And I had already planned a trip back to St. Louis to spend some time with some of my girlfriends and some of my cousins, my Mueller cousins, as I call them. Mm-hmm. And finally, the intermediary called me one day and said, hey, I was just talking to your birth mom, and she is ready for me to give you all her information. And she would like to talk to you on the phone and potentially meet you. So I was thrilled. And the first night that we talked for probably 3.5 hours. I know it was way past my bedtime, and I'm pretty sure it was past hers too. We're both early risers. So, but I was asking tons of questions. Like, my birth name was Wendy. And so I said, did you name me that, or did the adoption agency name me that? And she said, oh, I did. And she said, after Peter Pan, because there had never been a Wendy before that. And she said, I thought that was just a really cute name. And I was kind of surprised that my parents changed my name, but my dad's name was Don, and he's a little bit of a narcissist. So and when I was adopted, I was 15 months old, and I could not say Donna at the time, although I was talking, but I couldn't say Wendy. I said Nene. So my dad actually kept that as my nickname my whole life, Nene.
Oh, that's cute.
So that he kind of, I guess, incorporated my name into my life.
Mm-hmm. That's really cute, actually.
Yeah, we spoke for at least 3 hours, and it was just it was a very satisfying conversation and definitely a memorable evening. I don't think I could tell you half of what we talked about. I think a lot of other people have said the same thing on your show, but it's true. We talked about everything and nothing. But it was just interesting. When I saw a picture of my birth mom, I thought, well, we don't look anything alike. She's brunette and has green eyes, and I'm, was blonde. And I have blue eyes, but the shapes of our faces are the same. So I think that's why that lady at the adoption agency said that I looked like my mom, because maybe I did at that particular time with our faces and stuff, but I was definitely a blonde back then. And anyway, but as I've gotten older and more pictures are posted on social media of us together and whatnot, people have said to me, gosh, you look so much like your mom. Mm-hmm. And I do see it now, especially when my daughter says the same thing. She's like, wow, you two definitely do look alike.
That's incredible. When Donna refers to her daughter there, she's talking about the baby she placed for adoption, whom she's also in reunion with. We'll get to that part in a bit. Donna told her birth mother that she would love to meet her, and her birth mother agreed that maybe next time Donna was in St. Louis, they could carve out time to connect. Coincidentally, Donna already had a trip planned for 3 weeks after their first call, so her birth mother agreed maybe they would meet up. The woman said, "Why don't you just come to my house?" which Donna was perfectly fine with, so Donna asked her birth mother for her home address.
Turns out she lived 5 blocks from where I lived in St. Louis right before I moved to the Phoenix area.
Wow.
And I had dated a guy that literally lived a block away from her. So, I mean, I could have seen her
Oh my
in
gosh.
passing. I could have seen her at the local grocery store. We're both avid book readers. I could have seen her at the library. There was all this like, oh, wow, you literally lived right there. And I lived there for 2 years.
Oh
We
my
could have seen
gosh.
each other. But there was a lot of those things in our lives. Like when I was 10, there was a new mall that opened up about a mile and a half from my childhood home. And come to find out, she worked there for a while at a local retailer for a while. So it was kind of funny. I'm like, and then too, I could have run into you.
Yeah, right?
So yeah, so kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm. So what was reunion like? You guys decided you were finally going to meet. You were traveling 3
I
weeks
met at
later
her
to St.
house,
Louis.
and my then boyfriend had come with me to St. Louis. It was his first time visiting that place, so he went out and explored the city while my birth mom and I spent most of the day together. We went to lunch. She showed me family genealogy that one of her brothers had done. She's one of 5 children. She had 3 brothers and one sister. All her brothers have unfortunately passed away by now, but one of them did extensive genealogy research. And so that was kind of cool to learn a little bit about what had been done. And, our first ancestor came over from Ireland on that side of the family in the early to mid 1800s. And it turns out when he first went to Cincinnati, and then he married a gal named Catherine Murphy. And they moved to the St. Louis area because the steamboat era was really in full swing then. And St. Louis was actually a destination spot, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the hub of the Midwest, I guess, for a long time because of its area, geographically desirable, being near 2 rivers. And so he opened up, I guess you could kind of call it a bed and breakfast, like a mini hotel. And he also had a bar, and it was down in the St. Louis area. It used to be called the Levee, and now it's called Laclede's Landing, where one of the owners, Pierre Laclede, founded the area. And come to find out, the building he had burned down, I think sometime in the early 1900s from what I remember. And a new building was built and a new bar there called Lucius Boomers. And I bartended there years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And so when my birth mom and I were going through this, and she was telling me, the building burnt down. And this was the best that she could remember. She goes, I think it was in the early 1900s. And the new building became, she goes, a really popular bar now. You've probably heard of it, called Lucius Boomers. And I was like, oh my gosh. I said, I used to hang out there. And then I bartended there for a while.
Oh my
And we
gosh.
both kind of looked at each other and went, oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah.
That's
So,
crazy.
pretty
You
crazy.
bartended
I
at a
know.
family establishment from way back.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's really
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
what was the rest of your reunion like? Like, when you saw her, did you just kind of stare at her? Like, what? I know a lot of adoptees just you examine the other person. Like,
Yeah,
whoa.
I think so. I think we were both kind of enamored with one another at first, and definitely for the first hour or two, I remember kind of looking at her mannerisms, and she got up and offered me some coffee and asked what I took in it, and I was just watching her pour it, and just little things like that you're kind of hyper aware of every movement and I'd never been that hyper aware of anybody's movements before in my entire life. But there I was just kind of studying her, looking at her from every angle. And I know that she was doing the same to me.
Mhm.
And, here I am, this child that she gave up years ago. And the whole day was just kind of really crazy. We went to lunch later in the day, and I think the server said something about, you two have the same smile, and which I think we do. So it was just, I was just soaking it all in and just relishing it and just, holding it close to my heart. And I have really fond memories of that whole day.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. That must have been really, really unbelievable. Donna and her birth mother took things slow in the aftermath. They continued to exchange letters, not ready to use their work email addresses for such personal interactions. For the first year or two, they spoke on the phone periodically. Fast forward to now, and Donna says she and her birth mother talk every Sunday. Coincidentally, Donna and I connected on a Sunday morning, and she told me the call to her birth mother was right after our chat. Donna said she likes to fly back to St. Louis to spend time with her 84-year-old birth mother.
I actually went back in April to surprise her for her 84th birthday. She had no idea I was flying in. I hadn't traveled since before COVID, but I didn't think I could pull it off unless I got her boyfriend's help. So I found him on Facebook and connected with him and said, hey, I'm Joan's daughter. I want to visit her. I want to surprise her for her birthday. Can you help me pull this off? Because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it without somebody's help. And I figured this guy is the closest to her. And they live at the same senior apartment center. So I surprised her. He took her to her favorite Italian restaurant back there. And they were, waiting for a table. And then I just popped up out behind a tree. And they were at a table outside. And I just said, I heard it's your birthday. And she kind of looked up at me and did a double take. She was so surprised.
Oh my God,
But
that's really awesome.
It was a fun evening. So I was really happy that I was able to do that. It was something I wanted to do for a long time and had kind of planned to do it when COVID hit. So I thought, well, all right, this will have to wait. But it was really nice. And then, last week when I was back there, I got to have lunch with her a couple of times. And I just really like to soak in all the time that we can spend together. But, talking to each other on the phone once a week, I mean, sometimes we don't have that much to say. Sometimes we want to talk about a book we read or, whatever's going on the news that might be of interest or, just anything and nothing.
Yeah.
But I think I would definitely consider her one of my best friends.
That's amazing. That's
Without
really,
a doubt.
really cool. Wow.
Yeah, she's just a cool person. I really like her. I mean, even if we weren't related, she's just a really cool lady. So I'm very, very fortunate to have been able to hook up with her. And her whole family just embraced me immediately. I'm pretty tight-ish with one of my biological cousins who lives back there. We're a lot alike and stuff. And so anyway, but her whole family was just great. And they had a reunion and I got to meet my biological grandmother. She's since passed away, but her name was Iris. And it was at a park. There was a big reunion at a park back in St. Louis. And I think I had known Joan for about a year. So it was really interesting to meet almost her entire family.
That's awesome.
So,
wow.
And it was scary but fun. So it was nice.
Speaking about her birth father, Donna shared that her birth mother gave her the man's name. Then Donna went and looked him up online, but she had trouble finding him. Donna finally got a hold of his ex-wife's sister, who was happy to convey the news to him that he had a child out in the world.
I met him. His name is Jim. He's very in touch with his Roman Catholic roots. And he came to visit me one weekend. At the time, he lived in Victorville, California, and he drove through Phoenix. He was driving to go to St. Louis to see the Pope when the Pope came to St. Louis, 1999, I guess.
Wow.
And so he said, well, I'm driving to St. Louis to meet the Pope. I have to drive through Phoenix anyway. Why don't I stop by and we'll meet if you're okay with that? And I'm like, absolutely, And I told him he could stay at my place, and he chose to stay at a local YMCA, which was fine. I just thought, we don't know each other, so I wasn't offended by that. But he was a little self-centered, a little bit of a braggart, and really tried so hard to get me to like him. But then he told stories about how he was in the military and he was drinking so much he got kicked out, and that he thinks that there might be a few other biological children that he doesn't know about. And I was kind of like, oh, I thought I was the only one. But anyway, it was just really, at times, very strained meeting him. And then when he left, I was actually a little relieved because I was like, whew, that was a lot of information to absorb. It was overwhelming. And then we talked a few times, exchanged some emails a few times, and he was getting ready to retire within the next year or so. And at one point he contacted me and said, my wife is really threatened by you, and she would like you to sign some kind of document waiving your interest in my estate. And so I said, well, let me look into that. I mean, I made very clear to both of my biological parents I wasn't looking for anything other than medical information. And if anything else occurred as a result of that, maybe a friendship, or something, then I was okay with that, but nothing else. So I looked into it and I contacted a friend of mine who's an attorney, and he said, well, according to the laws in California, which is where he lived at the time, nobody can do anything. Nobody can contest his will. And you're not even legally related to him. And you'd have to prove there was all these hurdles. And I thought, anyway, so my friend drafted up some kind of, disclaimer, and I signed it and had it notarized and sent it to him. And then he just became kind of a vicious asshole, excuse my French.
Really?
And he called me one time at my work and yelled at me about, so I don't even remember what it was, but I was just so like, I'm at work. You're calling me to yell at me?
Yeah.
I think I had said something like I wanted to meet your other children, and I think that made him kind of come unglued. He said, I told them about you. They don't have any interest in meeting you. And I finally just kind of told him what I thought and hung up the phone, and that was the last time I talked to him. And I did several months later contact. I have 4 half-siblings on his side of the family, 3 from his first wife, and then 1 from his second wife, who he lives with currently in Wyoming somewhere. His 3 older children. I couldn't find the girls, but I found the son because he didn't change his last name when he got married, so it was easier to find him. And I ended up meeting all of them, and they were fine and everything. But after a while, I think the thrill of having a biological sibling kind of wore off, and we weren't as in touch. And then, some years ago on Facebook, there was some political eruption between all of us, and they're all on one side of the aisle, and I'm on a different side of the aisle. And they deleted me as friends. And I wish them the best of luck. I don't have any ill will towards them, but they're very much hot-headed like my birth father.
Well, I appreciate you sort of sharing that the birth father connection can go a variety of ways because it's just a different relationship than with a birth mother. And any of them, any of the birth parents.
He remembers things very differently than my birth mother.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of leaning towards her side of the story, but then again, the truth may be somewhere in the middle.
Turning to Donna's daughter, she placed for adoption. We talked about her own pregnancy and adoption planning taking place a long time after her own adoption placement. Donna's birth mother placed her during an era where women were consistently told to forget about their child, following a narrative that the child would forget about the birth mother too, and everyone could start over with a blank slate. But Donna's experience was a little different. She said over the years, her biggest concern was that her baby girl was raised in a good environment by 2 parents who loved her, cared for her, and cherished her. Donna waited 18 years, then registered on an online reunion website, then waited and waited some more to be reconnected with her daughter. She registered on more sites, trying to increase her chances of finding her daughter again.
After several months, I thought, well, it's not going to happen. So I registered on a few other sites and did some other researching. And we actually connected a few days after her 19th birthday, which is when she went on to that same website. I want to say it was called adoptionreunionregistry.com, something like that. And within 3 days of her registering, we were matched. And so all kinds of excitement. I think I remember specifically being at my computer and just going, like kind of screaming. My then boyfriend ran into the room and he's like, what's going on? And I told him, I said, there's been a match on the adoption website and I think I'm going to be meeting my daughter soon.
Wow.
And so we were both just kind of like, wah! And
how old are you at the time, roughly?
I think I was 38 and she was 19.
Mm-hmm.
So once a match was for sure determined, they gave us each other's email address. And we exchanged a few emails. And, she said, my parents want me to ask you a few questions just to make sure you're who you say you are. And I said, okay. She asked me, what hospital she was born in, what time, how much she weighed, things like that, and how old she was when she was relinquished. So I answered all those questions. And next thing you know, we're connected, we're chatting, and then we're exchanging pictures. And I remember she sent me her senior high school pictures. There was 2 of them. And I just couldn't believe it. She looked so much like me.
Wow.
The only difference is her face is a little bit longer. She doesn't have the little round face like my birth mom and I have. And, the blondish hair. She has green eyes like my birth mom. And I was just blown away. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe how much she looked like me. So there was a lot of giggling and we didn't talk on the phone. I think she was kind of a little overwhelmed. And I wanted to elevate things and she wanted to put the brakes on it because I think she didn't know what box to put me in. There wasn't really a category. And I think that she was also starting to feel a little bit like she was betraying her parents.
Yeah.
And so I logically understood that, but I was just beside myself with the rejection part. And I think we kind of ended up having a disagreement at one point after we had been corresponding for about a year or two. I think I kind of came out and said, I'd love to talk on the phone. And she said she wasn't ready for that. And we kind of hemmed and hawed for a while. And then when she graduated college, I remember just feeling like, I feel like she should be inviting me to her graduation, but yet there wasn't that invitation and there wasn't that, like she didn't message me on my birthdays or Mother's Day or anything. And I was comparing our relationship to my relationship with my birth mother, who it was a very different dynamic. And I think we just weren't ready for each other at that time. So we kind of had a bit of a disagreement about it. And then we lost touch. When she graduated school, she didn't have that same email address after a few months. And so I didn't know how to get in touch with her. And I thought, well, I guess I just wait for her to get in touch with me. And then fast forward to several years later, 5, 6, 7 years later, I had been kind of keeping in touch with her on social media as far as, I don't want to say keeping in touch, but just like I noticed that, everybody gravitated from MySpace to Facebook. And so I saw that she had a Facebook profile and at first it was public. So I got to kind of watch her from time to time and just kind of, was watching from afar. And at one point I reached out to her and sent her a Facebook message, which in order to get that message, you had to really kind of look for it back in that era of Facebook because we weren't connected on Facebook. And I just sent her a message like, hey, I'm going to be coming to St. Louis sometime soon. If you'd like to, get together, that would be great. And I didn't hear from her. And then I think the next time I went to St. Louis, kind of same thing. So I'd send her a few messages every time I was getting ready to go back to St. Louis. And she messaged me back one time. And I had just gotten back from St. Louis, and she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't see this message until just now. My oldest son has a habit of taking my phone and looking at things, and then I don't get the notification. And so I'm really sorry. And she said, I would love to get together with you maybe the next time you visit. And I was like, oh my God, my heart stopped. And I was like, already planning my next visit. And I thought, oh, I can't do that. We've got a little bit of talking to do first. And so we chatted occasionally via Facebook Messenger, kind of got caught up to a little bit. I knew she had 2 boys at that time and she was married to her college sweetheart. And so I was just really happy for her. She a scholarship to college, which was the same college where I went and where she met her now husband. And so it's been really nice getting to know her again. And then we finally did meet, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. So we met at this restaurant and probably stayed there for 5 or 6 hours talking. And I have a really good friend that I met at the maternity home I was in. And she had also placed up her son for adoption at the same time that I placed my daughter. They're really close in age. And we've kept in touch. And so I thought of all people, I had to bring her with me to meet her. And she brought her husband, and we were just smiles for 5 hours and talking and just laughing, and the conversation flowed very easily. And we're sitting next to each other, and her husband is across from her, and my friend Kathy's across from me. And at one point we were sitting there, and I had my left arm up, kind of holding my face, and my other arm kind of holding my other elbow. And she was in the same position. So my friend got out her camera and just snapped a picture. And she said, you guys are just sitting, like, looking the exact same way. And her husband is like, you guys just look so much alike. And we definitely were both checking each other out. I mean, just to see somebody next to you that you look so much alike, and we're both ecstatic and emotional and happy and crying happy tears and just joyful the whole time. So we've met. I saw her again last week when I was back there visiting, and we met at a winery. And again, conversation just flowed. We just, it's like we just picked up where we left off the last time I was there. But I hadn't seen her since before COVID, so it was really nice to hug her again and see her and just have her right there,
Yeah.
And her husband is adorable, and he's a great guy. I really like him. And his family, I think, is really into the whole genealogy thing. So I think to a degree she was spurred to have some interest in her own background, maybe in part to him and his family. So at least that's what I suspect. But anyway, I have not met my grandsons yet. However, she texted me when I got back to Scottsdale last weekend, and she said, we told John about you. He's the oldest one. He's 11 now. And she said he's very interested. We showed him some pictures of you, and he's very interested in meeting you next time you come to town. So I am just all kinds of ecstatic and nervous and excited and happy and
The kids are interesting because I think we sometimes overthink what they need, and sometimes just the straight talk. Listen, I've never told you this before, but mom has 2 mothers, right? And just laying it out there and letting them start to chew on it can be really powerful. I found that with my own son, and I'm hopeful that they will sort of not try too hard to soften it and just let it be what it is. He'll figure it out. And at 8 years old, like, he kind of doesn't know enough to really understand it all, but he can start to get it, and that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited for you to meet him.
I am very excited too. And again, looking back on my life, I've just had so many. Well, what I will say about the winery that we went to last week, I want to say this because this kind of ties into my birth mother. When I think the third time I ever met my birth mother was back in Missouri, and she wanted me to, it was for Mother's Day weekend, I remember. I didn't surprise her for that weekend, but I had told her in advance I'd like to spend a Mother's Day with her, and she agreed, and she said, I'd like you to meet all my best girlfriends when you come to town, so let's go. We went to this restaurant in this little town south of St. Louis called Kimmswick. It's a real historical town, blah, blah, blah. And there's a real popular restaurant there called the Blue Owl. So we went to brunch there, and I got to meet all her girlfriends. And it was so fun to meet all of them. A little overwhelming because there was 6 of them, I think. We were all so full after lunch, and we decided to go for a walk. And we walked around this little town looking at various buildings. And I'm a very amateur photographer, and I love to take pictures. So I had a little Pentax at the time and took that out, and I was taking pictures of this old house called the Old House. And it's this historic house from 1870, I believe, and may have been one of the first houses in that town. And it was just an empty historic building. And fast forward to a couple weeks ago, my daughter and I were trying to figure out where we were going to go. And she goes, what about this winery? We both love wine and love going to wineries. And she goes, what about this winery? She sent me a link, and I looked at it, and it's a winery in Kimmswick, the same town where my birth mom and I went to meet, when I met all her girlfriends, and we walked around that town. Well, that winery is now in that old historic building.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
That's really
all
cool.
The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I saw the building, and I looked at her, and I went, I know that building. In fact, I have a picture of that building in my room as we speak in a frame because I liked the picture of it so much. And I framed it because I took a good picture. It's so funny, my jaw just dropped. And I remember I was at work, and I was telling the girl I share an office with, telling her this story. And she goes, oh my God, did you just get goosebumps? I'm like, pretty much. So I was telling my daughter this story. And when we were talking about the story again, when we were at the winery, she goes, I was telling my mother-in-law about this, and she said, we are cosmically related. And I went, that's it. That's it in a nutshell. I think we are cosmically related.
So crazy. Wow. That is really unbelievable. Yeah. How cool. I love that stuff. Well, Donna, I appreciate you telling me sort of everything about your own, you've gone through a lot. You, as an adoptee, have admitted your own lack of connection to folks based on how your life started, but also, you've confirmed what it was like to go through your own search as well as relinquish a daughter and reunite with her. I mean, you've been through a lot. It's really amazing, and I'm so thankful for you sharing all of that because a lot of people need to hear these components of what someone else's journey and adventure are like,
It has been a good journey. I have learned so much through both connections, with both reunions. It's been really a lot. And like I said, your show has been very eye-opening for me and therapeutic as well. Just from the very first episode, And I was enthralled with it. And it's so funny. My daughter said, "Oh, I never thought of listening to an adoption podcast," because we are both so into crime podcasts. And it's really weird because that's something we both like to listen to. But anyway.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And so she's like, when I told her I was going to do this podcast, she's like, "Oh my God, you're going to be on a podcast?" She was like, "That is the coolest thing."
Awesome. I love it. Really cool. Well, hopefully she'll enjoy hearing some pieces of your story. That's another thing that I think is also powerful about the podcast is it becomes a place where the adopted person can share their journey in a way that others have never heard them talk about it before, right? Where I've often said we sometimes get to tell sort of the elevator version of our story. You know, I was born, I was adopted, I found my parents, and it was awesome or it was awful. And it was like, you miss all the nuance, all of the really interesting, meaty details, the feelings and stuff. And this is part of what I love about doing the podcast is it gives people an open forum to share everything. And then their loved ones get to hear them talk about it in a way they've never heard it before. So I'm glad you're here to do that.
Well, and I'm glad that you have this platform because for me, thinking about doing this podcast over the last few months, and I highlighted some notes and stuff, and I think I kind of touched on everything that was in my notes, but it's been kind of cathartic for me. And so, even if just one or two people listen and go, "Oh, I can understand that," then I think it's totally cool. And I'm glad that you're doing this. I really am.
Thank you so much. But as I've always said, I can't do it if people like you don't come to be part of the show. So I'm really thankful to you as my guest. Thank you so much, Donna.
Exactly.
All right. You take care. Thanks for being here. All the best to you, okay?
All the best to you as well, Damon. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, it's me. Donna had a rough start in utero and admitted her forced detachment both from hospitalization and adoption probably contributed to some of her later attachment issues. I loved hearing that her adoptive father, a man who rarely apologized to anyone, expressed remorse for how he treated her when she was pregnant. That admission of a past transgression meant a lot to Donna, and to make it more broadly applicable, even though you think someone knows you've forgiven them, sometimes the person who has committed the act needs to set aside time and space to deliver their much-needed apology. My sense is, most birth parents never get such an apology from the people in their lives who forced or coerced an adoption plan. I'm so glad Donna thinks of her birth mother as one of her best friends, and that she has a relationship with her own daughter. Sometimes it sucks to have to give people space to let them grow and mature into your shared reunion. But your patience to let the other party be ready to receive you again can pay off in amazing ways. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you found something in Donna's journey that inspired you, validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn. Who am I really?